Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Much to do with my professionals, lots of politics, and we begin with David Drucker, the Washington Examiner, Thaddeus McCotter, WJR, and Francis Rose of Federal News Radio. Gentlemen, CPAC, the three-day intense meeting, lots of young people attending to hear from the candidates in the Republican Party for the nomination for the presidency. And I begin with my measure of Jeb Bush, who is the big name, because it's the Bush family with two presidents in it and a senator, and also because he conducted himself in an unusual fashion, to my understanding of CPAC. It was in a Q&A. And I ask you three to judge how Jeb Bush did in his question and answer period, where his wonkishness was to fore, compared to his recent poor reviews for public speaking. Mr. Drucker, I'll begin with you. How did it look to you in the room? Good evening to you.
Good evening, and it looked pretty good. I should note that, unlike past years, instead of just giving speeches, the way they generally did it this year was a speech and Q&A, or if the candidate preferred, Q&A only. And a couple of the candidates went only Q&A. Jeb Bush was one of them. And the thing about Bush that I'd say is this: it's not that the room necessarily was in love with him, and they did bring in a lot of Jeb supporters from D.C. It was organized in that very smart Bush way when it comes to political tactics. But he didn't try and pretend he was somebody that he wasn't. He explained why he was for things like a path to citizenship and immigration and Common Core. But he didn't lecture the crowd and explain to them why they needed to agree with him or else, or, it wasn't good for the party if they didn't agree with him. He just explained himself and was his usual detailed, wonky, sort of very engaging, political persona when it comes to these Q&As, which he's good at.
Thaddeus, your measure of the younger Bush. This is a man who acted extremely uncomfortable on the stage a couple of weeks back when he made a policy address, and yet he seemed comfortable taking questions. Is that a distinction that makes sense to you, that a lifelong politician would be so uncomfortable giving a prepared speech?
Well, I think that there are varying degrees of how people view giving a public speech. As we know, President Nixon was very focused on policy, was a terrible public speaker and a terrible public persona for much of his tenure as president and even before that. But when you deal with Jeb Bush, I'm not surprised at all. The Bush family does not have a distinguished lineage of public speaking, to be fair. But Jeb Bush is a policy wonk, and I think that he is just very comfortable discussing policy with people, especially in an informal setting. And I think it shows the depth of his knowledge of those issues that he is far more comfortable doing that, which I take to be a bigger plus than being able to give a speech, not referencing the current occupant of the office.
Francis, the rap on the Republican Party, if I were to speak in generalities, is that its retail politicians are not very bright. They're not the geniuses that the Democratic Party presents time after time, usually from a couple of colleges in the East. But Jeb Bush is reversing all that, if I understand. This is a man who has a grasp of national policy as well as state policy in Florida. Is Washington ready to, let's say, back off on the assumption that the Republicans are dummies?
Well, thank you for having me on, John, and good evening, gentlemen. I'm not sure whether Washington, per se, has a set view of Republicans as being bright or not bright. What Jeb Bush said that made people in Washington that I talked to talk this week is he said something about the Republican Party that a lot of Republicans wish somebody had said sooner, or that people said more often or more loudly. And that was, I'm paraphrasing, but he talked about the need of the Republican Party to stop talking about what they're against and start talking about what they're for. The interesting part of this is I talked to a number of folks this week who served in in both Bush administrations, and the word that I would use to describe their descriptions of Jeb is I guess, is wistfulness, with a recognition that he's very unlikely to be the nominee, because I don't think anybody in the Republican Party is that excited about a Bush versus Clinton election. People thinking, wow, this guy probably would be a better president than his brother, and maybe even a better president than his father, but it's a shame he's never going to get a chance, and this is 16, 18 months before the election's even going to happen.
Yeah, let's march to the sound of the younger guns here in the Republican Party. Quickly, Scott Walker, is he ready for prime time, David?
I think he needs a little work. He's got a lot of scrutiny because people like him so much, both on the establishment wing and the governing wing. He can hold a room. He projects leadership, but he needs to add some more policy depth to his talks, precisely because he's getting so much attention and has such an opportunity this early.
Thaddeus, your measure. He's a young presidential candidate, and he needs seasoning. Will he have the time to get it?
The media is not going to allow him that period of time. I think the party faithful will, especially those who know what they don't like and are looking for something different. But I do think that it goes back to what we started with. I'm much more comfortable with a person in the White House. They can sit in an informal setting and actually discuss policy in depth than I am with someone who can give a speech and then not know which way is up when they actually have to start discussing the policy in depth.
Francis, because I depend upon you for the gossip in Washington, does Washington know who Scott Walker is?
Oh, they know who he is very well. And I would say the one cohort in Washington that knows who he is better than just about anybody, including a lot of Republicans right now, is the Democratic machine, because they've tried to beat him at least twice.
Right.
He was not really high on the radar screen when he originally ran for governor. Nobody really gave a Republican candidate for Wisconsin, in Wisconsin, running for governor for the first time, much of a look. But when he won the recall election, they came after him full bore in the last election, and threw everything they had at him but the kitchen sink, maybe the kitchen sink too, and nothing stuck. He won re-election with about the same percentage, I believe, that he won the recall election. And so the operatives in the Democratic Party in Washington know him very well. They're very aware of him. I'm not sure I'd use the word scared, but they're very leery of the possibility that the Republicans might nominate somebody that could beat them in 2016.
CPAC took a straw poll, and the drum roll, the winner is none of the above, Rand Paul of Kentucky. David, were you surprised?
No, he's won it. I think this is his third year in a row. The libertarian youngins that pack CPAC, no pun intended, tend to go that way, so no surprise.
Thaddeus, these are your people, the author of Liberty Risen, the Libertarian Republicans. Are they everywhere? Are they in my studio? Can I turn around and speak kindly to them, Thaddeus? What calms them down?
One, I'm not a libertarian. Two, you're in New York. You're much more likely to find a communist behind you.
So, the Libertarian Republicans, is it good, Thaddeus, that they're attending, that they're excited?
Well, CPAC has always been far more libertarian than the party in general, and I think that trend continues, and I think that you'll continue to see that over time, as we've discussed before. But regarding CPAC, it should really be called Libertarian PAC to a large extent, because I think if you got down to what people believe in, as if they were cafeteria Catholics or something, but they tend to come out more libertarian than they do fundamentally conservative in the view of an old Buckley or Russell Kirk view, or even Edmund Burke, of what a conservative is.
Francis, are you going to surprise me and say that Washington's really a libertarian town?
No, Washington is nothing of the sort. And a Republican source of mine, known him for a very long time, has a very good track record of calling these things, says Rand Paul has about as much of a chance of being president as this guy does. And I know for a fact a lot of things about this person that make him unelectable. So I'm very confident to go by his word that Rand Paul won't have a chance to become president.
There are many other candidates to mention. We just mentioned the three that have been in the news. We'll come back to many times. We've got a long, long road before the first Republican debate next summertime. We're going to turn to the geopolitical story of the moment, which is the Prime Minister of Israel addressing an audience, AIPAC, this day, but tomorrow to the joint session of Congress to address Israel's concerns for the suspect secret nuclear weapons program in Iran and the response by the President and the National Security Advisor in these last hours. David Drucker, Francis Rose, and Thaddeus McCotter. I'm John Batchelor.